Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. Today we're going to be talking about the new tech elite on the right and other topics. Thanks for spending your morning with me. Okay, so here's our first article, Samuel Hammond in City Journal, A Rising Counter Elite. And most of these articles that we're going to be looking at today, they are quite recent. So this is from a few days ago. Let's take a look. Regardless of this November's election, Donald Trump's choice of J.D. Vance as his running mate for the 2024 presidential race signals a potential shift in the Republican Party's power structure. The decision was more than strategic. It heralds the rise of a new tech-savvy counter-elite that bridges Silicon Valley's spirit of innovation with working-class interests. From his hillbilly roots in rural Ohio to his venture capital role with Peter Thiel, Vance embodies this emerging coalition. As a key Trump supporter in 2016, Thiel's influence helped to bring unconventional thinkers from the tech world into politics, though lasting realignment was hampered by Trump's lack of the needed ideological infrastructure. This time is different. Over the last 4 years, a rising power center in US politics has consolidated, backed by an emerging tech elite and the new wealth of the internet era. The fusion of conservative populism with the tech right could reshape American governance. I just want to say something here about the new wealth of the internet era. I was in El Salvador recently. I was invited to go there to speak at a conference. My topic was on education, and I think a video of that will be out before too long. But one of the things I noticed is that among the kinds of people who are attracted to El Salvador, innovators, founders, people who are sort of pushed out of mainstream institutions because their ideas are too, let's say, forward thinking, or they don't fit into the established, they want to build something new, basically. A lot of those people also have an interest in, and sometimes very profitable, as it were, investments or holdings in Bitcoin. And you can see that when you have that, when you've made an investment that's done very well, when you have this, quote, new wealth of the internet era, unquote, then you can get involved in politics kind of more freely than you could if you still depended on the system for your livelihood. Okay, so the fusion of conservative populism with the tech right could reshape American governance. If one thing unites the tech right and rank and file Trump voters, it's a recognition that the old system, the legacy media, academia, and federal bureaucracy, is profoundly broken. The real debate today isn't between the left and right, tablet editor Alana Newhouse notes. It's between those invested in our current institutions and those who want to build anew. And I'll add, this is written August 23rd, so I guess that's before RFK Jr. gave his support to Trump, and now you might think it's all the more so the case, okay, that people supporting Trump, including RFK Jr.'s supporters, don't see it as a battle between left and right, but the corrupt in existing current institutions and wanting to build anew, make America healthy again, make America educated again, make America great again. Building anew requires a deep bench of policy talent that educational polarization has made too rare on the right. The tech sector is now filling that void, offering a new frontier of highly capable founders and entrepreneurs to bypass the legacy system. Something else I want to say, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but just in case you haven't watched the previous videos, which is, of course, possible, I'll say it here, which is when I started teaching online after I got my PhD from the University of Toronto, I opened up my own shop, okay? I started teaching online. The people who came to me to study, Martin Heidegger, Plato, Nietzsche, Alexander Dugin, and others, they were first and foremost from Silicon Valley. They were tech people. I didn't know that initially. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't gunning for them. It just happened. And I said, oh, this is interesting. There are people in the tech world who are trying to understand Carl Schmitt, who are thinking about the foundations of political theory and political philosophy, because for them, for some of them, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and crypto more generally is forcing them to think through basic concepts like state legitimacy, monopoly on violence, and so on, the possibility of the sovereign individual escaping the system of state control, which, by the way, last night I watched a documentary on John McAfee, the man who made McAfee antivirus software. And you can see it's not so easy for a quote unquote sovereign individual to escape the force of law of a sovereign state, because he goes from the United States to Belize, and from Belize to Guatemala, and from Guatemala later to other places, to the Bahamas. And anytime his ship lands, there are people there, customs agents, Navy, military forces, and so on, police officers. So it's one thing to try to be a pirate on the high seas, but it's another when you're dealing with the real, as I say, force of law of sovereign states. But okay, anyway, yeah, the tech sector is now filling that void, offering a new frontier for highly capable founders and entrepreneurs to bypass the legacy system. The rise of the tech counter-elite is happening just in time. With accelerating AI progress and the threat of a bellicose China, US institutions must transform to remain functional, let alone secure dominance for the next century. The US government's core machinery, built on New Deal and Great Society era foundations, can't be incrementally reformed to meet those challenges. It resembles a bloated corporation in need of disruption. Unwinding the long 20th century will require building parallel tech-native systems to grow and supplant what came before. Another article I read that was interesting on this topic, I don't have it pulled up for us, but I'll just tell you about it. This was on the flight to El Salvador. Lucky Palmer. Have you heard that name before? Lucky Palmer, Palmer. If you haven't, if you're like me and you didn't know too much about these things, you're not necessarily in the loop, look him up, Lucky Palmer. And there was a profile of him that was eminently readable, quite interesting and fascinating. How he says, well, I won't give you the whole backstory, but he's competing now on the front of military innovation, kind of as a private founder, innovator, and entrepreneur against huge institutionally established arms manufacturers and military contractors, and saying they can no longer keep up with the changing nature of the battlefield. So this is really a place for entrepreneurs and innovators, not for old established institutions. And you see that more and more in different parts of society. Okay. So again, accelerating AI, threat of bellicose China, US institutions must transform to remain functional, let alone secure dominance for the next century. So if you want them to secure dominance, then for sure you need to let the reins loose and let these creative thinkers and operators, people like Elon Musk and Lucky Palmer and so on, let them do their thing. To get a sense, and by the way, everybody knows now Musk's support for Trump. That's another tech figure to put in the Trump column. To get a sense of the tech counter-elite's potential impact, go back to the early days of Trump's first term, when just before his inauguration, an unexpected name appeared on the shortlist for Federal Drug Agency Commissioner, Balaji. Many of you may know Balaji. If you don't, you should follow him on Twitter and you'll get a sense of his place in this ecosystem. I was working in downtown Washington, D.C., the author writes, when the news hit my Twitter feed. I did a double take. That Balaji, the cryptocurrency evangelist and one-time chief technology officer of Coinbase? I retweeted the news with a link to his 2013 startup school talk on Silicon Valley's ultimate exit, which I described as infamous. Maybe we'll have to read that on another occasion. Moments later, my phone rang. It was Balaji, as he is usually called. So the article had his last name too. I just skipped it. We had never spoken before, and I had no idea how he got my number. But before I could ask, he interjected. Infamous? Really? I think you mean famous. Infamous has negative connotations. No one who knows Balaji will find this story unsurprising. At the time, his trademark manic style was directed at surviving the intense vetting process that goes with taking on any significant government role. He even deleted his extensive Twitter archive, leaving behind a lone tweet, "Don't argue on Twitter, build the future." Hold on, I want to stop for a minute. First of all, to say hello to those of you who are watching. And also, if I'm not mistaken, it was Balaji who just recently announced, together with Brian Armstrong, is that his name? Don't Die. You know, the guy who's at the forefront of the public image of longevity studies now. He's trying to reverse his aging, tweeting that he has the erections of an 18-year-old when he sleeps at night and all of this sort of thing. If you know who I'm talking about, then that's the guy. Brian Armstrong, I think, is his name. He and Balaji are collaborating on a project near Singapore. You should look this up if you're interested in these kinds of things. Like, what are these tech guys doing? What are they thinking about? What are they building? Instead of tweeting on X, as Balaji said, right? Don't argue on Twitter, build the future. Look up Network School, I think is the name of that new project. Back to the article. As a fan of Balaji's and a critic of the FDA's role in stifling medical innovation, I, the author says, offered to write him a profile focused on his vision for the agency. Publications like Vox and Recode were already attacking, unearthing old comments in which he proposed replacing the FDA with a Yelp for drugs. The observation reinforced the arrogant tech bro archetype, the Silicon Valley founder who thinks he knows better than the policy experts, disregarding long precedent in favor of disruption. But as I talked with Balaji, the article continues, it became clear to me that his proposal had far more depth than the Uber for X style slogan let on. This wasn't surprising. While Balaji is now better known for his Bitcoin maximalism, his technical background is in biotech and computational genomics. Before his career as a technology investor, he co-founded with his brother Council Inc., a genetic consulting company, while still completing his PhD in electrical engineering at Stanford. It quickly grew into one of the country's largest DNA screening companies. Balaji argued that the FDA's pre-market approval system was outdated in the coming era of personalized medicine, where the falling costs of genomic sequencing and advancements in gene editing, like CRISPR-Cas9, are changing the landscape, a point also made by the late Manhattan Institute thinker Peter Huber in City Journal. And of course, we're reading City Journal, so they put in a good plug for themselves there. The FDA's reliance on clinical trials based on a frequentist theory of statistics, averaging treatment effect across thousands of participants, may miss crucial nuances. What if a new treatment has unexpected interactions with other drugs or benefits only those with particular genetic profiles, effects that could be washed out in the aggregated data? Balaji, and keep in mind, why, if you're just tuning in, because not everybody watches from the start all the way through. So this article is about the new tech elite, tech figures who are part of Trump's circle. And in 2016, when Thiel was brought in, this figure was mentioned. Balaji, the author of this article, was surprised because Balaji is, well, we're learning about it now. He's not only a Bitcoin maximalist, but he also has this knowledge and skill set in genomics and in DNA screening and so on. So he has this idea for the FDA, which is what we're discussing. Balaji's idea was to build a parallel system based on post-market surveillance, combining data collected from the FDA's adverse event reporting system and other sources with Bayesian machine learning techniques and updating the efficacy of a treatment in real time. In principle, such a system might supplant aspects of the traditional drug approval process while allowing for the discovery of 1 in a million therapies. Whether Balaji would have succeeded in implementing such a system, we'll never know. A week into his presidency, Trump signed a ban on travel from a number of Muslim-majority countries, leading Balaji to pull his name in protest. I'm sure you remember this, the ban on travel from Muslim-majority countries, but you probably didn't know the other thing, that Balaji pulled his name out of running for that position in or around the FDA. I just want to pause here for a second because I'm wondering, now that RFK Jr. is in on the Trump train and helping to make sure that the corrupt Democrats don't get into power, or don't rather stay in power, and since health is such an interesting and important policy area for RFK Jr., I wonder whether the already existing tech trad alliance under Trump will now combine with this new infusion of health-centric RFK Jr. style thinking under the Trump umbrella, and maybe they can do something there. We'll see. I mean, when I was in El Salvador, this is not secret because the videos were recorded and they're going to come out. There was one speaker there whom I had never heard of before. No particular offense to him. That's me. I can't be on top of everything. His name is Jack Cruz, and my understanding is he works with Jack Dorsey and Rick Rubin. He has appeared on the Huberman podcast, and he knows a lot of things. He's a neurosurgeon, but his areas of expertise, I think, in this world of cutting edge, innovative, new systems has to do with magnetism, light, and water. And he had said something about putting medical proofs through a zero knowledge proof, crypto computing, something. But the point is the collection together of health-based interests and these new innovative computational systems. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? It would be kind of neat, wouldn't it, if the Trump, Musk, Thiel, JD Vance, RFK Jr. ticket really did inaugurate some sort of new and exciting time for American health, technology, education, governance, in a way that wasn't just like, oh, wow, look at what these fancy people are doing, but that benefited you concretely. The same outlets that attacked Balaji's fitness for FDA commissioner had their doubts. No handshakes, please. The tech industry is terrified of the coronavirus, read one February 13 headline from Vox. Silicon Valley elites and tech billionaires, the article surmised, are simply projecting their privileged anxiety over doomsday scenarios. After all, according to one infectious disease expert Vox interviewed, the chances of anyone in the Silicon Valley area coming into contact with the virus were, quote unquote, astonishingly low. Less than a month later, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. The US went into varying degrees of shutdown, and Congress began prepping a $2.2 trillion relief package. Balaji's core predictions proved accurate. Okay, there's a saying in these online circles, for what it's worth, okay, you may know them or not, that the scariest words in the English language are Balaji was right. Mark Andreessen reposted that recently. Imagine how differently America's pandemic response might have gone under FDA Commissioner Balaji. Among the FDA's biggest mistakes, for example, was its failure to approve rapid testing. Inexpensive COVID tests were developed within the first few weeks of the pandemic, and a factory was even set up to produce them at scale, but the FDA repeatedly blocked their approval, citing a lack of data. Testing capacity that university labs offered was similarly nixed. The first rapid tests weren't approved until spring 2021, costing many lives. Balaji, in contrast, had advised both a decentralized approval authority testing and a broader right to try for new treatments and diagnostics. So in other words, guys, I'll give you the high-level summary here, and then we'll continue the article. If you had one of these tech bros in charge of the FDA at the time of COVID, things might have gone better because he was willing to do things that the FDA was too slow to do. Similar bureaucratic delays affected the vaccine. Thanks to its mRNA platform, Moderna was able to design an effective vaccine within days of receiving the virus's genome sequence. I'll add here parenthetically, I know that there are probably a lot of you who have some issue with the claims of the vaccine and its effectiveness, but we're just going to stick with what we see here to get to the punchline. Delivering the first doses to the NIH for testing on February 24th, 2020. It would take another 10 months for the first shots to get distributed, following delays in the FDA's final review, which included taking a 4-day weekend for the Thanksgiving holiday. By April 2021, vaccination rates were finally ticking up under the FDA's emergency use authority, though it would take until August for the first vaccine to gain FDA approval. By the way, really quickly here, I see in the comment box that the transcript of the talk, a question, will the transcript of the talk that I mentioned by Jack Cruz, or maybe mine, be shared here or uploaded? When those videos come out from the conference in El Salvador, I'll definitely ping you guys. If you're subscribed to the channel, I'll put something on the channel community board and let you know that it's come out, and I'll also send an update to the people on my mailing list. Throughout the pandemic, Balaji and others in the tech world were staunch advocates for moving faster, including through the use of volunteer challenge trials to expedite vaccine approval. Had the vaccine been distributed just 10 weeks earlier, calculations suggest the first doses to nursing homes would have saved upward of 40,000 lives. A Balaji-led FDA would likely have been faster still, tearing through bureaucratic red tape to enable vaccine production to ramp up as early as possible. If rapid testing and vaccines had been made available as soon as technically feasible, prolonged lockdowns, tens of thousands of deaths, and trillions of dollars in economic losses may well have been avoided. Okay, this is a counterfactual because that's not what happened, but it's nice to imagine trillions of dollars in economic losses avoided, tens of thousands of deaths avoided, prolonged lockdowns avoided, but you needed somebody else in the spot. Whether the Senate would have confirmed Balaji is another question. His eccentric political views would likely have made for an uphill battle, from his belief that the US dollar is close to collapse to his theory that the internet and blockchain technology are driving toward a world of decentralized network states. Okay, Balaji has a book called The Network State, and like I said, he's now opened up a school called Network School. But perhaps no great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness. We call that Millermania. On the cusp of a major technological transition, a little more madness in government might even be a good thing. We could at least benefit from having more weirdos and misfits with odd skills in positions of power, to borrow a phrase from the British political strategist Dominic Cummings. Instead, our political establishment is preternaturally hostile to eccentric reformers, as it must be for its own survival and reproduction. You see, you have a problem here. Peter Thiel discusses it in his book 0 to 1, that on one hand, founders have to be a little crazy, But on the other hand, their craziness can sometimes go too far. And they self-destruct. This is why Trump's pick of Vance for vice president is so encouraging. Okay, now we're back. So we've been discussing 2016, right? Balaji's name was brought to the surface. That struck this author as weird. Balaji and the FDA, what's that all about? But now that we see that in principle it could have been good, well, 2016 had a lot of obstacles in the way. Well, 2024 is very different because then Thiel was really the main and almost the sole figure. But now Musk, Thiel, Andreessen, Vance, and others are on the Trump team. So take one of, sorry, I skipped a paragraph here. This is why Trump's pick of Vance for vice president is so encouraging. It signals that the Trump campaign is serious about realigning the Republican Party around a true counter-establishment that, like Vance himself, bridges the rising cadre, is that how you say that? Cadre of conservative tech elites with the interests of everyday Americans. The story of Balaji's stillborn foray into government suggests what this might look like. And while Balaji himself is unlikely to have any role in a Trump-Vance administration, he's since moved to Singapore, a growing number of thinkers and builders on the right are cut from the same cloth. Take one of Trump's most prominent supporters, Elon Musk. Between SpaceX and Starlink, several of Musk's companies have become crucial technology platforms for the US government, demonstrating the value of his often uncompromising management style. Musk has reportedly pitched Trump on a government efficiency commission to bring similar results-oriented organizational principles into the executive branch. This could include leveraging AI-enabled automations to downsize the federal civil service and ensure the agency functions we still need can resist politicization and scale. I just want to ask those of you who are here, are you generally speaking, without knowing all the details and going into every calculation, are you generally speaking, excited or not, by the idea that Elon Musk could be in government? That he could take his management style, his tendency to try to make things work with the fewest number of people, he came into Twitter, right, fired 75% or however many members of the staff, and it got better, if you think it did. So do you like the idea of Musk going into government, or is it like, hey, look, maybe you know how to build cars and build rockets, but government is its own thing. Unless you know how to get along with well-established bureaucracies, they're going to crush you. Then there's the emerging crop of patriotic defense startups inspired by the success of Palantir and Anduril. If I'm not mistaken, Anduril, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the Lucky Palmer project. Lucky Palmer, who I mentioned earlier. As my colleague, the author writes, as my colleague John Askenas has argued, these companies are doing work of straightforward significance to America's status on the world stage. Reforms to federal procurement and contracting processes will thus be essential to ensuring that little tech, as Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz call it, can thrive in the shadow of defense giants like Boeing and Lockheed and big tech incumbents like Google and Microsoft. In his 2020 book, The New Class War, the historian Michael Lind argued that today's populism is a counterculture, not a counter-establishment. A counterculture defines itself in opposition to the establishment. A counter-establishment wants to be the establishment. Put differently, for populist currents to drive real reform, they must transcend charismatic leaders and budding demands for change in favor of the concrete institutions needed to effectuate power at scale. The building of that institutional capital was first put into motion by the 2016 election. It then dramatically accelerated following the institutional failures, hypocrisies, and cultural revolutions of the pandemic era. A true counter-establishment, which could claim the radical center of American politics, is now finally taking shape, underwritten by an ascendant community of tech iconoclasts. Okay, well, that was enjoyable. That article was written by Samuel Hammond, senior economist at the Foundation for American Innovation. So if you enjoyed that analysis, you should look up Samuel Hammond, look up the Foundation for American Innovation. And this was published in, there you go, City Journal. Okay, city-journal.org is their website. Okay, let me take a minute here to pop over to the chat, and then we'll move on to the next article. So I'll just go to the top here. Caledonian American, thank you. Nice to see you, David. Good to be with you. Hyper Modern. Where did I cop the drip? I don't even know what that means. By the way, looking fit. I'm drinking this right here in Ontario at the moment. I don't know where else It's milk with no added protein powder, 34 grams of protein. Not bad, right? Together with my, as usual, morning coffee. So what's wrong with these billionaires? Pavel Durov, detained, as everybody now knows, in France, the founder of Telegram and VKontakte, 100 children through sperm donations. What's the obsession about having kids? You know, there's an article I was looking for, I wanted to cover. I think it's called like Why the Right is Obsessed with Babies or something like that. But I don't have it pulled up for this talk, but we can focus on natalist thinking on the right on another stream for sure. Then Justin says, as a bit of a tech bro, I wouldn't have touched any of those vaccines with the 10-foot pole. I know there are others who feel that way too. I myself did not get the jab. Some of you did, some of you didn't. Hopefully, whatever you did worked out well. Hello, Abdullah. Nice to be with you. Thanks for tuning in from Pakistan. Somebody says, I don't trust the Thiel cabal, but I don't mind some innovative management. Okay, so, you know, Musk, somebody's excited about Musk being in government, potentially in a government efficiency office. It'd be nice, right? I mean, government is not known for its efficiency. And if Musk could come in and do some good work there, that would be something. So let's go to the next article. Let me just make sure it's nicely set up on screen. So this is scholars-stage.org. I haven't read this yet. It's from a few days ago. Same kind of topic as the one we're discussing, the New Tech Right. But this one is about the books they read, I think. The Silicon Valley Canon on the Paideia of the American Tech Elite. And I just want to see who's the author here. Well, it doesn't say, so maybe at the bottom. Okay. All right, here we go. You guys ready for another article? This is a good one. By the looks of it. By the way, I'm in a new place. The room is a little bit reverby from my perspective, so hopefully it sounds okay to you. I'll have to put up something to kill that reverb. Though much may separate Thucydides, Xenophon, Ephorus, Plato, and Aristotle from one another, on this fundamental point, they and those who subsequently followed their lead were agreed that to come to understand a polity, one must be willing to entertain two propositions. First, one must presume that the form of government, the constitution, the rules defining membership in the politeuma or ruling order, is the chief determinant of a political community's character. Second, one must assume that paideia, which is to say education and moral formation in the broadest and most comprehensive sense, is more important than anything else in deciding the character of a particular politeia. In one passage of the Politics, Aristotle suggests that it is the provision of a common paideia and nothing else that turns a multitude into a unit and constitutes it as a polis. In another, he indicates that it is the politeia which defines the polis as such. Though apparently in contradiction, these two statements are in fact equivalent. Guys, we'll stop and comment on this in a second. For as the peripatetic, meaning Aristotle, recognized, man is an imitative animal. The example we set is far more influential than what we say, and it is the distribution and disposition of offices and honors constituting the politeuma of a given polity that is the most effective educator therein. So we're reading the opening quote of this article. It's a quote from Paul Rahe, The Spartan Regime. Let's just continue the quote, setting the tone for the rest of the article. What really matters most with regard to political understanding is this: to decide who is to rule or what sorts of human beings are to share in rule and function as a community's politeuma. That is to determine which of the various and competing titles to rule is to be authoritative. In turn, this is to decide what qualities are to be admired and honored in the city, what is to be considered advantageous and just, and how happiness and success, eudaimonia, are to be understood and pursued. And this decision, more than any other, determines the paideia, which constitutes the one way of life, a whole polis. Okay. What we had in that quote from Paul Rahe, who, by the way, is a great scholar of the history of republicanism, the notion of a republic. I'm reading a book of his right now. I don't have it to show you. I don't think I do. I'm reading a book of his right now on English republicanism, Machiavelli and English republicanism. But anyways, here's what he's saying. This is kind of what I said in my El Salvador speech on education too. It's this, that a regime is largely defined by who it picks as its top figures. And there's going to be a direct relationship between the character of the regime and its approach towards education. So like I said in my El Salvador speech, my family members grew up in the former Soviet Union, and they had a Marxist-Leninist education, because that was the way that you educated Soviet citizens. So the education in the regime matches the type of regime. There are times where maybe it goes, separate, it diverges. Then you have a bit of a problem. If there's a kind of free-for-all in education, or let's say the American regime, you're trying to keep it on sound constitutional principles, let's say, and meanwhile the education has gone in the direction of woke, neo-Marxist, postmodern, leftist freak show style teachings that are designed to undermine the principles of American constitutional faith and identity. So you see, the idea is that there's a link between the political community, the regime, and its education. So that was what the opening quote told us. And you should know about this author, Paul Rahe. This is very important, by the way. In my online school, which you're not obligated to study at, but I want to tell you, millermanschool.com, I teach Aristotle's Politics. I teach Plato's Republic. I'm just finishing a course now on Plato's Laws, because indeed, these are crucial books and ideas and concepts to understand. But let's now go to the article having set out this concern with education and the type of regime. I often draw a distinction, says the author, between the political elites of Washington, D.C. and the industrial elites of Silicon Valley with a joke. In San Francisco, reading books and talking about what you've read is a matter of high prestige. Not so in Washington, D.C. In Washington, people never read books, they just write them. To write a book, of course, one must read a good few, but the distinction I drive at is quite real. In Washington, the man of ideas is a wonk. The wonk is not a generalist. The ideal wonk knows more about his or her chosen topic than you ever will. She can comment on every line of a select arms limitation treaty, recite all Chinese human rights violations that occurred in the year 2023, or explain to you the exact implications of a new residential clean energy tax credit, but never all at once. Hey, thank you, Baseball Worldwide, for the super chat. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here. And hi to everybody else who's watching. The operatives and the media men of DC are of a different species. They will freely talk of anything regardless of how much they know about it. But by and large, the pundits and politicos are not intellectuals, and little intellectual work is expected of them. Those who love ideas for their own sake travel the path of the credentialed expertise. Washington intellectuals are masters of small mountains. Some of their peaks are more difficult to summit than others. Many smaller slopes are nonetheless jagged and foreboding. Climbing these is a mark of true intellectual achievement, but whether the way is smoothly paved or roughly made, the destinations are the same: small heights, little occupied. Those who reach these heights can rest secure. Out of humanity's many billions, there are only a handful of individuals who know their chosen domain as well as they do. They have mastered their mountain. They know its every crag. They've walked its every gully, but it is a small mountain. At its summit, their field of view is limited to the narrow range of their own expertise. Okay, this is the Washington reader. The Washington expert, the Washington specialist. In Washington, that is no insult. Both legislators and regulators call on the man of deep but narrow learning. Okay, this is the specialist. Yet I trust you now see why a city full of such men has so little love for books. One must read many books, laws, and reports to fully master one small mountain, but these are books, laws, and reports that the men of other mountains do not care about. One is strongly encouraged to write books or reports, which are simply books made less sexy by having an executive summary tacked up front. But again, the books one writes will be read only by the elect few climbing your mountain. Okay, so let's say you have a 1,000-page book on the legal policies regulating interstate commerce. Okay, you probably have to do a lot of work to write that, but it's an example maybe of a small mountain. The social function of such a book is entirely unrelated to its erudition, elegance, or analytical clarity. It is only partially related to the actual ideas or policy recommendations inside it. In this world of small mountains, meaning the specialism, the specialty focus of Washington intellectuals, books and reports are a sort of proof, a sign of achievement that can be seen by climbers of other peaks. An author has mastered her mountain. The wonk thirsts for authority. Once she has written a book, other wonks will give it to her. So that was the Washington side of the picture. What about the Silicon Valley side of the picture? The technologists of Silicon Valley do not believe in authority. They merrily ignore credentials, discount expertise, and rebel against everything settled and staid. There's a charming arrogance to their attitude. This arrogance is not entirely unfounded. The heroes of this industry are men who understood in their youth that some pillar of the global economy might be completely overturned by an emerging technology. These industries were helmed by men with decades of experience. They spent millions, in some cases billions of dollars on strategic planning and market analysis. They employed thousands of economists and business strategists, all with impeccable credentials. Arrayed against these forces were a gaggle of nerds not yet 30. They were armed with nothing but some seed funding, insight, and an indomitable urge to conquer, and so they conquered. Okay, in other words, the Silicon Valley person, he doesn't have the same sort of respect for authority and need for authority and legitimation, according to this presentation, as the Washington wonk has. He's this young, energetic up-and-comer who can overturn the old established systems on the basis of new technologies and new wealth. So this is the story the old men of the valley tell. It is the dream that the young men of the valley strive for. For our purposes, it shapes the mindset of Silicon Valley in two powerful ways. The first is a distrust of established expertise. The technologist knows he is smart, and in terms of raw intelligence, he is, in fact, often smarter than any random small mountain subject expert he might encounter. But intelligence is only one of the two altars worshipped in Silicon Valley. The other is action. The founders of the Valley invariably think of themselves as men of action. They code, they build, disrupt, they invent, they conquer. This is a culture where insight, intelligence, and knowledge are treasured, but treasured as tools of action, not goods in and of themselves. Now, by the way, I want to say here quickly that when I myself transitioned from being an academic to being an independent academic, like I said, when I started teaching online outside of the established university, finding my own students, developing my own courses, and I saw that people were coming from Silicon Valley to work with me, which is amazing. I hope that more continue to do so because it's very satisfying. But I too recognized how important it is. Like in the university, you're not really taught to build. You're not taught to innovate. You're not taught to be an entrepreneur. You're definitely not taught to run a business. I'm not talking about MBA programs. I studied philosophy and political science. It's considered that, you just want to move to an established institution, university A, B, or C, under an authority figure, Mr. XYZ, and then the path will be laid out for you. But when you leave the established institution, you don't have the benefit of just sitting around doing nothing. You got to build, innovate, ship, invent, conquer, disrupt. So it was interesting, actually. It's more exciting in a way than just having everything provided for you at the outset. This Silicon union of intellect and action. Okay, philosophy and entrepreneurship is how I see it too. Those intellect and action. The Silicon union of intellect and action creates a culture fond of big ideas. The expectation that anyone sufficiently intelligent can grasp and perhaps master any conceivable subject incentivizes technologists to become conversant in as many subjects as possible. The technologist is thus attracted to general sweeping ideas with application across many fields. To a remarkable extent, conversations at San Francisco dinner parties morph into passionate discussions of philosophy, literature, psychology, and natural science. If the Washington intellectual aims for authority and expertise, the Silicon Valley intellectual seeks novel or counterintuitive insights, which again, I guess would partially explain why, in my case, some of them have been drawn to me in my school. Thank God that they have been. He claims to judge ideas on their utility. In practice, I, the author says, find he cares mostly for how interesting an idea seems at first glance. He likes concepts that force him to puzzle and ponder. This is fertile soil for the dabbler, the heretic, and the philosopher from first principles. It is also a good breeding ground for books. Not for writing books. Being men of action, most Silicon Valley sorts do not have time to write books, but they make time to read books. Or, barring that, time to read the number of book reviews or podcast interviews needed to fool other people into thinking they have read a book. As an aside, I suspect this accounts somewhat for the popularity of this blog among the technologists. I, the author says, am an abler dealer in secondhand ideas. Okay, so I've mentioned how my school has benefited from this Silicon Valley interest in philosophy. Clearly, there are others who have benefited from it as well. I laugh sometimes at the complaints I see on humanities Twitter, bewailing the shallow reading habits of the tech bro. The technology brothers read a lot. I am sure more novels are read every year on Sand Hill Road than on Capitol Hill. Washington functionaries simply do not live a life of the mind. If Silicon Valley technologists do not always live such a life, they at least pretend to. By the way, this division between Washington and Silicon Valley as two completely different things. It's one of the reasons why people like me and maybe people like you are energized by Vance, Musk, Andreessen, and these other people coming on board into the Trump administration, because it brings this intellectualism closer into Washington. Now, you may like that, you may not like that, but I at least am excited by it. The upshot of all this is that books have an inordinate impact on the Silicon Valley mind space. Often these books are stilted academic titles, works which at first glance have no obvious connection to software. It's interesting how Seeing Like a State has made it into the vague tech canon, Jasmine Sun comments, despite being a random anarchist anthropologist who specialized in Southeast Asian agrarian societies. Vague tech canon is a clever phrase. Siloed off on so many little mountains, I could not speak of a common DC canon, vague or otherwise. But for Silicon Valley, the term is just. There are no formal canonizers in Silicon Valley, and thus no formal canon. But a vague canon, the sort that ties together any historical community of requisite intelligence and literacy, certainly exists. I challenged my readers, the author writes, on Twitter to try and define it. Q. Patrick Collison, who writes, I think it's stratified by generation, but here's an attempt. This isn't the list of books I think one ought to read. It's just the list I think roughly covers the major ideas that are influential here. So let's see. Guys, ask yourselves, if you're in this tech circle or if you're around this tech circle, which books here are right and wrong. I'll go through the list. Okay, let me just make sure it's not too, I don't want it to become cumbersome to read, but okay, Asimov, Foundation, Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, Brand, The Whole Earth Catalog, Brooks, The Mythical Man Month, Robert Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a book that I must have read when I was like 12 or 13 or 14. I remember that quite well. Caro, The Power Broker, Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, Alexander, A Pattern Language, that's architecture book. I remember my older brother reading that book at one point. Card, Ender's Game, Hofstadter, Gödel, Escher, Bach. I think everybody has seen that at some point. Papert, Mindstorms, Wolf, The Tinkerings of Robert Noyce, Abelson and Sussman, Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. Richard Feynman, surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. Okay, Making of the Atomic Bomb, The Big Score, Finite and Infinite Games, Diamond Age, Skunk Works, and this other list that I have up on screen here. I'm not going to read everyone. The Sovereign Individual, I did a video about that not too long ago because I had so many, I'd never even heard of it before, but I had so many students in my school saying, hey, if you're interested in philosophy and Bitcoin, philosophy and crypto, philosophy and these new technologies, you should read The Sovereign Individual, which I then did. Hold on, let me get back on screen here. Okay, so these other books, Titan, What the Dormouse Said, Founders at Work, Thinking in Systems, Less Wrong, The Lean Startup, and so on, PayPal Wars, Slate, Star Codex, sounds familiar, Uncanny Valley, this biography of Elon Musk, and so on. Okay, 0 to 1, Thiel 0 to 1, for sure. So that's one list. Here somebody has another list, adds some other books that are part of this canon. Dozens of other people responded. Some of the common titles from these responses included Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Lord of the Rings, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Snow Crash, Innovator's Dilemma, The Martian, Thinking Fast and Slow. That's true, a lot of people mention that book. And various titles by René Girard. You can divide most of these titles into 5 overarching categories: works of speculative or science fiction, historical, case studies of ambitious men, or important moments in the history of technology, books that outline general principles of physics, math, or cognitive science, books that outline the operating principles of business strategy and successful startups, and finally, narrative histories of successful startups themselves. Okay, if those of you who like and are interested in this world and want to see what the tech people are reading, not necessarily books of philosophy, but as you just heard, historical case studies and principles of physics, math, cognitive science. So here are some nice recommendations. As somebody who teaches philosophy and political theory, I can tell you definitely Heidegger has been a big one. People are interested in Martin Heidegger. Machiavelli, for sure, whether Machiavelli himself or James Burnham, who wrote The Machiavellians, who wrote, I think, Suicide of the West, who wrote On the Managerial State. So James Burnham comes up sometimes on the political theory, political philosophy side of things. Leo Strauss, definitely, which is why we covered Peter Thiel's essay called The Straussian Moment. So we could add to that list, but let's go on with the article. I do not think the average Silicon Valley founder has read all of these titles, but enough of them have read, say, Cherno's Titan or Rhodes's Making of the Atomic Bomb that the rest of them might be expected to have something intelligent to say about Rockefeller or Oppenheimer if the topic comes up over the dinner table. The focus on biographies does not surprise me, the author says. There's an implicit great man or great team theory of history behind the vague tech canon. But I do not think Silicon Valley readers are drawn to these histories and biographies because of the light they shed on historical processes, or even some deep-seated belief in the primacy of agency over structure. The attraction feels more primal to me, or perhaps more classical. Here's how Plutarch, classical biographer par excellence, described his attraction to the stories of great men. Quote, "We may say then that the achievements of this kind, which do not arouse the spirit of emulation or create any passionate desire to imitate them, are of no great benefit to the spectator. On the other hand, virtue in action immediately takes such hold of a man that no sooner he admires a deed than he sets out to follow in the steps of the doer. Fortune we prize for the good things we may possess and enjoy from her, but virtue for the good deeds we can perform. The former we're content to receive at the hands of others, but the latter we desire others to experience from ourselves. Moral good, in a word, has a power to attract towards itself. It is no sooner seen than it rouses the spectator to action, and yet it does not form his character by mere imitation, but by promoting the understanding of virtuous deeds, it provides him with a dominating purpose." Unquote. That was Plutarch. The classical historian did not think in terms of historical processes, but in terms of deeds, great deeds, the sorts of deeds that brought glory or shame to the doer simply by being done. Perhaps you see the connection between this conception of history and the lengthy epigraph at the top of this post. Okay, that's the one we read about paideuma, paideia, the polis, the politeia, okay, the regime and its education. Each Greek polis was united by a common set of moral ideals. These were often taught formally, but the most important education came from observation, not instruction. The distribution of power and honor within a polis was itself an education in character. By observing who was allowed power and honor and how the powerful and honored comported themselves in the affairs of the city, the youth of each polis learned what it meant to be a good man and live a good life in their community. Thus, the structure of rank and honor, politeuma, and the moral formation of the citizen, paideia, were one and the same. The historian and biographer extends this backwards in time. Now youth find models of honor not only among the living but among dead. To study the great men of a community's past is to study what greatness means in that community. That, I think, is half the purpose of these biographies of Roosevelt and Rockefeller, Feynman and Oppenheimer, and these other figures, Thiel and Musk included. These books are an education in an ethos, such as the paideia of the technologists. Okay, so that was the end. I don't see the name. Do I see the name of the author here? I always want to give credit where it's due. Well, the blog is scholars-stage.org. I'm not sure I see the author's name anywhere here, so I can't tell you who wrote it. No. Okay, but look, let's get the point of the article on the table. So the paideia, that last line is a nice actual summary. Here it is. The paideia of the technologists is the study of great inventors, great thinkers, great men, and their great deeds, because that's what gets emulated. So on one hand, they want to be in power. They want their type also to represent the education of the future elites. So you have a kind of nice virtuous circle here. Get inspired by the great deeds of great founders. Relive that greatness in yourself by yourself being a great founder. And as we saw with the other articles that we have covered on this channel, both earlier in this live stream and on previous occasions, then you can actually get into government, close to government, and help to disrupt not just on the corporate level, but on the political level, at the level of political community. So that was interesting. I thought it was going to be something different because some figures in that circle, Mark Andreessen, for instance, they often do post about the books that they're reading. They tell you what they have been reading, what they recommend. And it's true that sometimes there are those specialty books, but often, for example, I know Mark Andreessen has posted about the Ancient City. You can look that book up, The Ancient City. Aristotle, not only the politics, but the Nicomachean Ethics, for instance. Okay, so that was that article. If there's something else kind of surprising that a small group of you might want to take away from this, whether you're watching now or watching later, it's this. Make a note of this guy's name, Paul Rahe. He writes good works on kind of in a Straussian spirit on the history of republicanism, as I said. All right, well, I'm having a nice time. Thank you for spending your morning here together with me as we go over some articles. I have another one queued up. This is called Modernity and Postmodernity. Peter Augustine Lawler. I believe this was republished on August 20, 2024. How Machiavelli, Rousseau, and Nietzsche shaped our era and how conservatives respond. So that's a nice topic. I want to make sure we cover that together. Just give me 1 second here to catch my breath, drink my coffee, and we will continue. And by the way, you should know where this is from, modernagejournal.com. So if you like this article, you should go to modernagejournal.com, support their work. And the author, Peter Lawler, forgive me if I'm wrong, okay, I believe he's deceased. If he's not, then sorry about that. But if I'm not mistaken, we've read one of his articles on this channel before, and I recall that it was a republication because he's no longer writing. In the meantime, thanks again for being here. Feel free to comment, share, like, subscribe, all those things. Okay, modernity and postmodernity. A huge question, obviously, of great significance to Leo Strauss and his students, because if you read, for example, Natural Right and History, or really anything that Strauss wrote, you're going to see that these figures, Machiavelli, Rousseau, and Nietzsche, figure prominently in Strauss's account of the history of political philosophy, as well they should. And I believe there's a connection between Lawler and Strauss. Probably Lawler was a student of Strauss, but let's take a look and see what we can learn together. By the way, this isn't completely unrelated to what we've been discussing, because in order to make sense of the tech trad alliance, in order to make sense of the rise of the new tech elite on the right, it helps to think it through against the backdrop of the history of political philosophy. Because in some cases, these tech figures are attracted to anti-modern thinkers, which you could regard as strange, since what could be more modern than technology? So, okay, modernity and postmodernity, let's take a look. The modern must be contrasted with the ancient or the traditional. And so conservatives are characteristically skeptical, if not contemptuous, of every modern claim. Okay, so conservatives are aligned with the ancient or traditional, therefore they are against the modern. Thinkers usually regarded as conservative, from Leo Strauss to Jacques Maritain, trace the beginning of modern thought to Machiavelli. The Machiavellian innovation was to devote human beings to the conquest of nature, to turn human efforts toward the acquisition in freedom in this world of what God had promised in the next. Okay, so forget about the afterlife. Let's focus on this world. Let's focus on getting freedom here and now. Let's conquer nature and liberate ourselves. Not quite taking the kingdom of heaven by storm, but doing on earth what was promised to us in heaven. Machiavelli redefined human virtue as whatever works in transforming the world in the name of human security. He reduced religion to a useful tool in achieving political goals. Machiavelli even deprived philosophy of its high and independent status of contemplating the truth about nature and God by holding that the truth is that we only know what we make. Okay, so if you only know what you make, then you can't contemplate the things that were not made by you. You can't contemplate the cosmos, the whole, and the highest intelligibles. So Machiavelli demotes philosophy. Every human claim for wisdom must be tested practically. We can only know the world by changing it. Let me say here briefly, some of you who watch this may know Oren McIntyre, who's at the Blaze. He just had an online figure called the Athenian Stranger on his show to discuss Leo Strauss's book, Thoughts on Machiavelli. So if you're interested in Strauss and Machiavelli and you follow Oren McIntyre, you should look at that episode too. So every human claim for wisdom must be tested practically. We can only know the world by changing it. Thus, moral and political life in modern times no longer aims to cultivate human souls, but to protect human bodies. The attempt to use political means to elevate the soul turned out to be ineffective and needlessly cruel. Now, guys, I have to tell you, I'm going to keep reading this and hopefully you enjoy it, but these formulations that you're getting in this article are extremely compact. And the argumentation and the insinuation and the implications are really dense and rich. So indeed, Leo Strauss's book, Thoughts on Machiavelli, and the other things that Strauss wrote about Machiavelli are helpful in understanding just what's at stake in all of these formulations, okay? But we'll stick with this as a, let's say, nice first introduction. So again, moral and political life in modern times no longer aims to cultivate human souls. Okay, so you should know that, for example, in Plato's Laws, end of book 1, politics is defined as the art whose business it is to care for souls. So classical model, politics has to do with soulcraft. Modern model, no longer aims to cultivate human souls, but to protect human bodies. Okay, you can also read Giorgio Agamben on biopolitics to see how this plays itself out. The attempt to use political means to elevate the soul turned out to be ineffective and needlessly cruel. We cannot make human beings good through an appeal to moral and religious motives, but we can make them act as if they were good by using fear to predictably control their bodies. Does that sound familiar? So the modern premise is that human beings are free individuals with no duties given to them by God or nature. Their only duty is to obey those contracts, ultimately based in fear, which they have made with other individuals. Characteristically, modern government uses strong political institutions, such as the separation of powers and checks and balances, to limit and direct human action. The main goal is to protect human beings from the tyranny of unlimited government without expecting too much of either rulers or ruled. Modern government, in fact, is to be limited but strong. Free human beings consent to be ruled in order for their bodies to be more secure and comfortable, but they would not consent to be needlessly afraid of government or to have their souls cruelly tortured. So the American Constitution, for example, creates a strong presidency that is limited both by Congress and by the necessity of securing re-election, which hopefully the Democrats don't do. This moderate and modern form of government must be praised for its effectiveness, for its protection of human security and liberty, and for providing a context for unprecedented human prosperity. In other words, even critics of modernity have something positive to say about modern forms of government, okay? Must be praised for its effectiveness, although if Musk gets in there, hopefully he can increase its effectiveness and efficiency. For its protection of human security and liberty. Look, it's not perfect. You know that if you're the founder of Telegram, you can get arrested even in a Western country. And for providing a context for unprecedented human prosperity. Okay, inflation is high. You may be struggling, but still, we're talking here comparatively. But conservatives would add that no decent modern government has been wholly modern. Decent modern governments have relied heavily on their pre-modern inheritances, including respect for tradition, religion, and various kinds of uncalculating virtue. Strong institutions are not enough for a free society to work. Good government always depends also on the existence of free and responsible citizens, and these do not just happen. Modern society, conservatives add, erodes its pre-modern capital, sows the seeds of its own destruction. So conservatives recognize that something is decent about modern governments, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've taken over pre-modern sentiments and principles, that they're not just focused on institutions, they're also focused on character, personality, and the development of a well-ordered soul. Except that the more modern they become, the less they become interested in the development of those things, and therefore they lead to their own demise, or as he puts it here, they sow the seeds of their own destruction. Conservatives have plenty of evidence that modern thought and action are not in the long run compatible with moderation. Modern limited government gave way to revolutionary efforts to use unprecedented forms of cruelty to perfect human existence on this earth. Marxist thought might be viewed as a more consistent form of Machiavellianism. All means necessary might be used to bring heaven to earth, and terrible cruelty in the short term might be used to obliterate cruelty altogether over the long term. Without something like revolutionary success, the modern world might be judged a failure. The moderns' success in reducing the recognized presence of God in the world and in allowing people to acquire more wealth and power, conservatives argue, has made them more anxious and restless and on balance less happy. That the deepest modern impulse is necessarily revolutionary might first have been noticed by Rousseau. The bourgeois individual that moderate modernity brought into being is miserable and contemptible. He has no idea what virtue and happiness are. But Rousseau still embraced the modern premise that there's no going back to the simple and noble world of the citizen and the saint. He concluded that modern efforts must be radicalized to eradicate human individuality altogether. The modern paradox is that a world that began with the celebration of the free and unencumbered individual seemed to culminate in the worst form of anti-individualistic or misanthropic tyranny. You guys know Alexander Dugin, for instance, has his own analysis of that. If you look at the interview I did on blogging theology, we went into it in some detail. How does individualism lead to anti-individualistic misanthropic tyranny? Modern thought created the bourgeois individual, and then it became radically anti-bourgeois. The best student of Machiavelli of our time, Harvey Mansfield, who himself was a student of Strauss, the gold standard teacher of the history of political philosophy, in my view, the best student of Machiavelli of our time, Harvey Mansfield, has remarked that if Machiavelli were alive today, he would admit he was wrong. The Florentines' view was that Christianity was the cruelest form of domination over the human soul imaginable. But today, he would know that it was nothing compared to the ideological tyranny of the 20th century. That fact surely would have caused him to reevaluate pre-modern Christian virtue, says Mansfield, which offered the most steadfast foundation for dissident resistance to communism. What Machiavelli regarded as unnecessary classical and Christian constraints on human freedom are in fact largely based on the realistic pre-modern distinctions that separated beast, man, and God. So Machiavelli, you should read and study Machiavelli for sure. You should listen to podcasts about Machiavelli like Warren McIntyre's, and you should read books on Machiavelli like Strauss's. But this is a very serious issue. Okay, let's reread this last sentence. What Machiavelli regarded as unnecessary, classical, meaning like you say, Greek and Roman, and Christian constraints, well, primarily Greek, Christian constraints on human freedom are in fact largely based on realistic pre-modern distinctions that separated beast, man, and God. So the classics were right, Machiavelli was wrong. When it comes to understanding political community, human nature, and the limits of political aspiration, how can you have the best without, you don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. You want to accomplish what you can in politics. You don't want to be sort of utopian and messianic about it in a way that proves destructive. But this article is arguing that Machiavelli was mistaken about the classical and the Christian constraints on human freedom, and that he would acknowledge his own mistake if he could see how bad things have become. The modern project has been to turn human beings into gods, but the foundation of that effort has been the proposition that the human being is merely a body, just another animal. It is characteristically modern to be so devoted to freedom that the limitations and directions nature and God have given human beings seem like tyranny. It is equally modern to believe that anyone who thinks that human beings have souls, that they are more than bodies, has fallen victim to tyrannical delusion. As Pascal predicted near the beginning of modernity, the result of that confusion has been more to brutalize than to divinize human beings. Guys, you should recognize, and maybe it is surprising, maybe it's not surprising, but I'll tell you that thinking about the soul is part of the classical teaching on politics. Look at Plato's Republic. It has to do with, among other things, the parts of the soul. What is a well-ordered soul? Who are we? What kind of being are we? Should we aim at material satisfaction, like get as much money as you can so that you can have as much food, drink, and sex as you can? Is that it? Therefore, our political order should be established around that goal. Are we primarily characterized by our freedom so that everything should be marshaled for the sake of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is the most important thing about us that, we're made in the image of God? And therefore, since we're all made in the image of God, equality, the equal dignity of every human being on earth, should be the aspiration of political activity? Or is it the excellence of a hierarchically ordered soul, virtue? And if so, what are the peaks of virtue? The greatest book on this topic, in my opinion, I'm doing a course on it right now, Plato's Laws, that's saturated with these questions. And in fact, not only at the end of book 1 of Plato's Laws do you have this statement that politics is the art of caring for souls, by the time you get to book 10 of Plato's Republic, you have demonstration of the priority of the soul to body. Because even in Plato's Laws, he says there are some people who say that the body is more important than the soul, and they have a certain political teaching that leads you astray. And we therefore need to demonstrate that the soul is more fundamental than the body, so that we can have a political order that deals with the soul. Incredible, right? I think so anyway. But modernity reversed all of this. It's modern to believe that anyone who thinks human beings have a soul, it's modern to believe that if you think we have a soul, you've fallen victim to tyrannical delusion. That to be free means to be free of all limitation, all direction, all natural inclination, all divine guidance. Okay, another view of the modern paradox is the Hegelian Marxian claim that the aim of the modern world is to bring history to an end. Modern thought understands the human being as free from natural determination to create himself or make history. So the end of history would have to be the end of human liberty. The end of our free or godlike striving is to make ourselves merely animals again. I told you earlier that in this article, he's compressing a lot of things. He's really compressing a lot of things. This argument about the end of history and our freedom comes to an end and we become animals, you have to read, if you want the long version of it, not only Fukuyama's book, The End of History and the Last Man, but even more importantly, Kojève's book called Introduction to the Reading of Hegel. But yeah, okay, fine. So the idea here, I think I even have a video on it on my channel, but I'll tell you very quickly. It's like the human being is characterized by the fact that we desire something that is not there. We desire, in effect, a nothingness, because nothing represents what we desire. There's nothing there yet. And we bring what we desire into being by working on the given world. So let's say I want a house. There's no house there, but there are materials, natural materials. And I can transform the naturally given world through my work and action in order to bring what I desire about. And then I have a new stage. So I was at T0, I have a desire, I act and transform the world. Now I'm at T1. I'm at a different stage of time. I have worked, transformed the world. My labor has transformed things. I also have the memory of what I did. I have the recollection. I have the story, the account. And history is a sequence of this T1, T2, T3, ... Okay, these different moments in time, the sequence in time, whose sequence is given by the fact that there's, to repeat, a series of actions designed to try to satisfy our desire. And in the account of Kojève/Hegel, our desire is never satisfied at one of these stages, which is why history keeps going, until the time when our desire is finally satisfied. That moment is the final. It's T subscript, we'll call it F, final. It's the last moment in time. Because we no longer have to work to transform the given world. We no longer have to work to move human history forward. We no longer have the impetus to act when our desire is satisfied. This is sort of the model in those books. Okay, I'm not telling you what's the case. I'm telling you what Kojève argues about Hegel, so you have some deeper understanding of what's being said here in this book very quickly. In this article, I mean quickly. So at the end of history, what does it mean? It means man's desire is satisfied. Man's fundamental desire is not a desire for food, drink, or sex. Man's fundamental desire is a desire for recognition. And that desire is fulfilled not when I give you a bottle of water, something to eat, or someone to sleep with. The desire for recognition is fulfilled when you have built a political order where the mutual recognition of one another's infinite worth and dignity is established. So history culminates, it ends when there's a political system, at least in principle, that recognizes only when you and I see each other as full-fledged human beings can we satisfy our true desire for recognition. But now something amazing happens. Remember what I said at the beginning of this little diatribe. The human being is characterized by a desire for something that isn't there. And that's why we work and that's why we fight. But if what we desire is there, then strictly speaking, we're no longer human. The human being is characterized by something that he no longer does because he's finished it. It's done. It's over. Close the book on it. The human being is done. So at the end of history, the human essence is, as it were, fulfilled or completed. It's done. And what Kojève says is, well, look, the world doesn't magically disappear. It's not like, poof, and then, you know, like you turned off your video game console. Things still happen. So in a sense, we're still here. History has ended. The human being was historical. So who are we at the end of history? We're now just like an animal. Like bees build beehives, beavers build dams, birds do whatever birds do, and the human animal will do whatever the human animal does. He's no longer properly speaking human. He's no longer properly speaking historical. Okay, so if you found that interesting, that's Kojève's Introduction to the Reading of Hegel. Okay, where are we here? So modern thought, we said that. So the end of history would have to be the end of human liberty. The end of our free or godlike striving is to make ourselves merely animals again. That's what I was trying to explain, okay? We become merely animals because our human essence is, if to be human is to be historical, at the end of history, you're no longer human. Simple as that. Rebellion against this conclusion is the beginning of postmodern thought. Most postmodern thought follows Nietzsche in an effort to liberate human will or greatness from the reductionist tendency of modern scientific reason. Postmodernity, so understood, is the celebration of free human creation for no particular purpose. History cannot end, in this thought of Nietzsche, in this postmodern thought, because history can have no real point. Anything rational or predictable is inhuman. But this alleged postmodernism is in truth an intensification, the author continues, Peter Lawlor, of the modern tendency to liberate human will from natural and divine constraints. The modern project is in effect criticized by the postmoderns for not being modern enough, for having a residual faith in the goodness of human efforts and in the possibility of human progress. The postmodern view is that the modern project is even crueler than Christianity because it ruthlessly and futilely aims to impose scientific order or direction on chaotic human reality. Thus, most postmodern thinkers on rather Machiavellian premises reject modern science and replace it with the human imagination. Only the imagination can give human beings the experiences of security and comfort they crave. We can use the imagination to control our experiences, even if we cannot really eradicate human contingency and mortality. I interject again. One of the authors I talk about from time to time on this channel, I've done research on, written a book on, and so on, is Alexander Dugin. He's somebody who, again, is not modern. He's very anti-modern. In fact, he says you should attack modernity from two positions, from the pre-modern and the postmodern. So it's kind of in the field of what we're talking about in this article. And for sure, he's somebody for whom imagination is a crucial concept. He has, not translated into English, unfortunately, a book called Sociology of the Imagination, where he discusses Gilbert Durand. And he writes about Henri Corbin's book, Creative Imagination in the Sufism of Ibn al-Arabi. So it's interesting. As you attack modernity, whether from the postmodern or from the pre-modern, imagination is back on the table as a faculty that is humanizing in a way that merely scientific rationality is not. Postmodernism, as it has evolved, would have repulsed Nietzsche, the author continues, who connected great or authentically human willing with the reality of the human experience of the abyss, of the nothingness that surrounds our brief and accidental existence. The greatest of postmodern thinkers, Martin Heidegger, renounced the resolute Nietzschean willing after his ineffective performance as a Nazi. But the murky later thought of Heidegger seems too much like fatalism to be very inspirational. Something else, those of you who are new here, you should know, Heidegger is a crucially important philosopher for me, for my school, and for this channel, for all the authors I study. My first book was on Heidegger, and I've put out as many good free videos on Heidegger as I know how to do on this channel, not to mention the 3 Heidegger courses I have in my school. So if you don't know Heidegger, take the opportunity eventually to learn about him. Back to the article. There is also a less noticed conservative postmodernism, postmodernism rightly understood. This authentic postmodernism is based on a criticism of modernity for its lack of realism, for its inability to tell the truth about the greatness and misery of being human. The basic human experiences are of limitation and of responsibility. To live well, human beings must accept the distinctively human duties that come with living in the light of the truth. The bad news is that human beings are not free to impose their own will on nature. They cannot make and remake the world to suit their convenience. The good news is that they're fitted by nature to know the truth they did not make and to be open to God. They were born to know and love, not just to suffer and die. This sort of postmodern thought is associated with Solzhenitsyn and American literary Thomists such as Marion Montgomery, Walker Percy, and Flannery O'Connor. Conservative postmodernism does not entail the wholesale rejection of all that the modern project accomplished. The achievements of modern science and technology, for better and worse, will remain with us, and the postmodern task is to subordinate them to properly human purposes. The genuine successes of the best modern forms of constitutional government deserve to be perpetuated, but the liberty they protect has to be understood as the liberty of human beings, not beasts or gods. Human liberty must be freed from any confusion with either liberationism or libertarianism. Postmodernism is in many ways a revolution in thought, but it is not intended to produce revolutions in practice. Perhaps the shortcoming of late modern political thought, the author says, is the completely unsubstantiated belief that political revolutions could ever be relied upon to cure what ails human beings. So that was an interesting and dense article, too compact at times, which is why I wanted to take a few pauses to just elaborate the underlying argument and point out where to go next. That was by Peter Augustine Lawler, published August 20th, 2024 in Modern Age, a nice journal, modernagejournal.com. Make sure you go there if you enjoyed that, modernagejournal.com, how Machiavelli, Rousseau, and Nietzsche shaped our era. So I've got courses on Rousseau, I've got courses on Nietzsche. I will have a guest instructor teaching Machiavelli soon. Look out for that. And I have several courses on Heidegger, like I said, if you want to study any of this in more detail. Let's see what he's got on his reading list at the end here. Further reading, as I mentioned, Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History. Okay, I've got a couple courses on Strauss in the school, but I tell you that, but you should just study Strauss anyway, whether you do it with me or somebody else or on your own. Daniel Mahoney's book on Solzhenitsyn, Darren McMahon, Enemies of the Enlightenment, Mark Lilla, The Restless Mind, and Lawler's Postmodernism Rightly Understood. So it looks like this author, I haven't read his book on postmodernism, but it looks like he defines himself as a conservative postmodern thinker, okay? Somebody who wants to preserve the achievements of modern science and technology, but wants to reject the interpretation of the human being as no longer properly human. So that was that. Okay, let's see where things stand. This has been a pretty good live stream, right? I'm enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying it. Maybe I'll save these articles for later. Another one from the Modern Age called Moral Imagination. I guess I'll show you what I was planning to read. I don't think I'm going to get through it. I'm getting kind of, I'm enjoying the time together with you, but I'm getting kind of spent here. So Overman on Nietzsche and Our Crisis of Masculinity. That looks interesting. Maybe we'll save that for tomorrow. And another one, which was Nietzsche, a techno-optimist. Okay, so why don't we put those off for later? Tell you one other thing completely unrelated to what we've been discussing. But if any of you are Oasis fans, or if you've been following the careers of Liam and Noel Gallagher, each of whom has done good solo work in the last however many years, it looks like they might be reuniting. So I don't know whether that's exciting to you. Possibly you don't care at all. But I figured I'd mention it. In my intro music, which I'm not going to replay to you, I use a song by Liam Gallagher called Diamond in the Dark. I didn't have to pay to license it, but it gets a copyright infringement every time I use it, which means I can't monetize this channel. So even if you viewed this video a million times, I wouldn't make any money on it because I'm using Liam Gallagher's song Diamond in the Dark on my intro music. But you know what? It's a pretty good song. It sets a good mood. And that's that. So there you go. Oasis might be reuniting. I know that's not related to anything we've been discussing, but I was a big Oasis fan when I was young. I'm still a fan of Liam and Noel's music. And I just thought I'd share that with you because why not? So I'm Michael Millerman. All the links where you can follow me if you're interested, Twitter, Substack, YouTube, needless to say. And my school, check it out. Thanks for spending your morning here. Hope you enjoyed that. Take care. Be well. Goodbye.